In the shadowed halls of Blackthorn Grange, a blood-stained glove lies abandoned in the library, a chilling whisper of a crime yet to be uncovered. Where is Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the reclusive widow who vanished without a trace? Why does a cryptic letter speak of betrayal and a hidden heir? And who is the mysterious man with the scar, lurking in the shadows? Step into a world of deception, where every guest hides a secret, every clue conceals a lie, and only Hercule Poirot, with his brilliant little grey cells, can unravel the truth. Will he uncover a murder, a conspiracy, or something far more shocking? Prepare for a tale of suspense, where nothing is as it seems, and the truth will leave you breathless. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blackthorn Grange. The late summer sun cast a golden haze over the rolling hills of Devon, where Blackthorn Grange stood like a sentinel of a bygone era. The estate, with its ivy-clad towers and mullioned windows, exuded an air of faded grandeur, as though it clung to its dignity despite the passage of time. Its sprawling gardens, meticulously trimmed, whispered of wealth, while the shadowed corners of its stone facade hinted at secrets. On this particular August afternoon, in 1928, the air was heavy with the scent of roses and an undercurrent of unease. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion of Hercule Poirot, gazed out of the window of the chauffeured Rolls-Royce as it wound its way up the gravel drive. The invitation to Blackthorn Grange had arrived unexpectedly, penned in the elegant hand of Lady Beatrice Ashford, widow of the late Sir Reginald Ashford, a financier of some repute. The note had been courteous but insistent. A weekend gathering to discuss a matter of utmost delicacy. Hastings, ever susceptible to the charm of an English country house, had urged Poirot to accept, sensing an adventure. Poirot, however, had been less enthused, his moustache twitching with suspicion at the vagueness of the summons. "It is not, mon ami, the habit of Lady Ashford to invite strangers to her home without purpose," Poirot had remarked, his green eyes narrowing as he folded the letter. "This delicacy, it is a veil for something more sinister, I think." Now, as the car slowed before the imposing oak doors of the Grange, Hastings felt a shiver of anticipation. The house seemed to watch them, its windows glinting like eyes in the fading light. A butler, stiff as a statue, emerged to greet them, his face a mask of professional neutrality. "Welcome, gentlemen," he intoned, his voice as crisp as the starched collar of his shirt. "Lady Ashford awaits you in the drawing-room." Yet there was something oppressive in the air, a weight that pressed upon the senses. In the drawing-room, Lady Beatrice Ashford stood by a marble fireplace, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon. She was a woman of perhaps 60, her posture regal, her eyes sharp with intelligence. Around her, a small assembly of guests sipped tea or sherry, their voices low, their smiles polite but strained. Hastings took in the scene. A young woman in a fashionable cloche hat, her fingers nervously twisting a pearl necklace. A ruddy-faced man in a tweed suit, laughing too loudly at his own jest. A thin, bespectacled gentleman, scribbling in a notebook. And a woman in widow's black, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, how kind of you to come," Lady Ashford said, her voice smooth but laced with an edge of urgency. "I trust your journey was pleasant?" "Most pleasant, madame," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. His small, precise movements and impeccable suit stood in stark contrast to the sprawling chaos of the English countryside. "But I confess, your invitation intrigues me. You speak of a matter delicate, yet you do not elaborate. Hercule Poirot is at your service, but he prefers clarity." Lady Ashford's smile tightened. "All in good time, Mr. Poirot. First, allow me to introduce my guests." She gestured to the young woman with the pearl necklace. "My niece, Miss Clara Ashford, recently returned from Paris." Clara inclined her head, her eyes darting to Poirot with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The ruddy-faced man stepped forward, extending a hand. "Major Ernest Caldwell, retired. Fought in the Great War, you know. Delighted to meet a fellow with a reputation like yours, Poirot." His grip was firm, his manner jovial, but his eyes lingered on Clara, a fraction too long. The bespectacled man looked up from his notebook. "Dr. Simon Pritchard, historian," he said curtly, as if resenting the interruption. "I'm here to catalogue Sir Reginald's library. Fascinating collection, really." His fingers twitched, eager to return to his notes. The woman in black raised her eyes, her face pale and drawn. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance," she murmured, "Sir Reginald's sister. I live here at the Grange." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and she seemed to shrink into herself. "And this," Lady Ashford continued, indicating a man who had just entered from a side door, "is Mr. Julian Trent, my late husband's solicitor." Trent, a lean man with sharp features and a meticulous suit, nodded politely. His laughter rang hollow. Dr. Pritchard's pen scratched incessantly, and Mrs. Vance's eyes darted toward the door as if expecting an unwelcome visitor. Poirot, seated in a high-backed chair, sipped his tea with the air of a man studying a chessboard. His gaze moved from face to face, lingering on each guest as if peeling back layers of pretense. Hastings, accustomed to his friend's methods, knew that Poirot was already cataloguing details: the angle of a glance, the tremor of a hand, the pause before a reply. "Madame," Poirot said at length, addressing Lady Ashford, "you have assembled a most interesting company. But I sense there is more to this gathering than the pleasure of our company. Will you not share the true purpose of your invitation?" Lady Ashford hesitated, her fingers tightening around a teacup. "You are perceptive, Mr. Poirot," she said. "The truth is, I fear for the safety of someone in this house. I have received disturbing letters, anonymous, of course, but they hint at a danger, a threat to one of my guests." A murmur rippled through the room. Clara gasped softly, and Major Caldwell's face reddened. Dr. Pritchard's pen froze mid-stroke, and Mrs. Vance's hands clenched in her lap. Only Julian Trent remained impassive, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Threats, you say?" Poirot's voice was calm, but his eyes gleamed with interest. "And you believe this danger is imminent?" "I do," Lady Ashford replied. "The letters speak of a reckoning, of secrets that must not be kept. I fear—" She broke off as the butler re-entered, his face pale. "Madame," he said, his voice trembling, "forgive the interruption, but there is something you must see. In the library." The room fell silent. Lady Ashford rose, her composure faltering. "Very well, Grayson. Lead the way." The group followed, a procession of uneasy figures trailing through the dimly lit corridors. The library, a vast room lined with leather-bound volumes, was as grand as the rest of the Grange. But it was the scene at its center that drew a collective gasp. On the floor, beside an overturned chair, lay a single object: a woman's glove, stained with what appeared to be blood. Clara stifled a cry. Major Caldwell swore under his breath. Dr. Pritchard adjusted his spectacles, peering at the glove as if it were a historical artifact. Mrs. Vance swayed, clutching the arm of a chair for support. Julian Trent's face remained unreadable, but his fingers twitched at his side. Poirot knelt beside the glove, his movements precise. He examined it without touching, his eyes narrowing. "Most curious," he murmured. "A glove stained with blood, yet no body, no sign of struggle. And the hour, 5 minutes past 4, by the clock on the mantel. This is no accident,
Hercule Poirot will uncover the truth of this matter. But I warn you all." His gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. "The little grey cells, they are already at work, and they do not rest until the truth is revealed." As the guests dispersed, their faces pale and their whispers urgent, Hastings felt a chill settle over him. Blackthorn Grange, with its polished surfaces and hidden shadows, was no longer merely a house. It was a stage, and the curtain had risen on a drama that promised to be as intricate as it was deadly. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Guest. The library of Blackthorn Grange, with its towering shelves and the faint must of old books, seemed to pulse with a new kind of silence as the guests dispersed from the unsettling discovery of the blood-stained glove. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 4:30, each second a reminder of the mystery that had descended upon the house. Captain Arthur Hastings lingered near the doorway, his eyes fixed on Hercule Poirot, who remained by the glove, his small frame radiating an intensity that belied his calm exterior. "Mon ami," Poirot said, glancing up at Hastings, "you observe the glove, yes? But do you see it?" His voice was soft, almost musical, but it carried the weight of a challenge. Hastings frowned, adjusting his tie. "I see a glove, Poirot, a woman's, stained with blood. Quite a grim find, I'd say." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of mild amusement. "Grim, perhaps, but it is more than a glove, Hastings. It is a question. Whose glove? Whose blood? And why here, in this library, at this precise moment? The answers, they are not in the glove itself, but in the minds of those who walk these halls." Before Hastings could respond, Lady Beatrice Ashford re-entered, her face pale but composed. "Mr. Poirot, I have instructed Grayson to summon the staff. They must be questioned, and I've sent for the local constable, though I fear he will be out of his depth." "Most wise, madame," Poirot replied, his eyes still on the glove. "But tell me, who among your guests or staff might wear such a glove? It is silk, finely made, not the sort worn by a maid or gardener." Lady Ashford hesitated, her fingers brushing the brooch at her throat. "It could belong to Clara, my niece. She has a fondness for such things, brought from Paris, or perhaps—" She trailed off, her gaze flickering toward the door. "Eleanor, Mrs. Vance, has similar gloves, though she rarely wears them now." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. "And the staff? How many reside here?" "7, Lady Ashford replied. "Grayson, the butler, Mrs. Harrow, the housekeeper, 2 maids, Ellen and Rose, the cook, Mrs. Gibbs, the gardener, Tompkins, and a young footman, P.Q." A sharp cry echoed from the corridor, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. Clara Ashford burst into the room, a cloche hat askew, her eyes wide with panic. "Aunt Beatrice! It's Eleanor! Mrs. Vance! She's gone! I went to her room to check on her, and it's empty. Her shawl is on the floor, and her door was ajar." The room seemed to contract, the air growing heavier. Lady Ashford clutched the back of the chair, her knuckles white. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "I mean she's not there." Clara's voice trembled. "I looked in the garden, the drawing room. Nothing. It's as if she's vanished." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "Mademoiselle Clara, calm yourself, I beg.
Tell me, when did you last see Mrs. Vance?" Clara swallowed, her fingers twisting her pearl necklace. "Just before we came to the library. She was in the drawing room, sitting by the window. She seemed nervous, but she said nothing." "And her room?" Poirot pressed. "What did you observe? Every detail, s'il vous plaît." Clara took a shaky breath. "The shawl was on the floor near the bed. The window was closed, but the curtain was slightly askew. Her hairbrush was on the dressing table and— oh, her gloves! One was missing from the pair on the table." Poirot's head tilted, like a bird sighting prey. "One glove missing, you say? Most interesting. And the time?" "It was just after 4, Clara said. "I went to a room right after we saw that." She gestured toward the blood-stained glove, her face paling. Poirot turned to Lady Ashford. "Madame, I must see this room at once, and I request that all guests and staff assemble in the drawing-room. No one is to leave the Grange until we have clarity." The group moved swiftly, led by Grayson, whose stoic demeanor had begun to crack. Mrs. Vance's room on the second floor was as Clara described, a neatly appointed chamber with a 4-poster bed, a dressing table, and a window overlooking the rose garden. The shawl, a delicate lace affair, lay crumpled on the floor, its edges frayed as if caught on something. The single glove on the dressing table matched the one in the library, silk, finely stitched, with a faint monogram, E.V. Poirot examined the room with meticulous care, his gloved hands hovering over objects without touching them. He noted the hairbrush, its bristles holding a few strands of grey hair, and the curtain, which was indeed slightly askew, as if someone had brushed against it. The window was locked from the inside, its latch undisturbed. "No signs of a struggle," Poirot murmured, almost.
Kidnapping in a locked house, with no sign of forced entry? No, it is too early for such conclusions. We must gather the facts. Back in the drawing room, the guests and staff assembled, their faces a gallery of unease. Major Caldwell stood by the fireplace, his ruddy complexion flushed with agitation. Dr. Pritchard sat with his notebook, his pen poised as if to record the proceedings. Julian Trent leaned against a wall, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Clara sat beside her aunt, her hands clasped tightly. The staff stood in a neat row, Grayson, impassive but pale, Mrs. Harrow, a stout woman with a stern expression. The maids, Ellen and Rose, both young and visibly frightened. Mrs. Gibbs, the cook, wiping her hands on her apron. Tompkins, the gardener, shifting uncomfortably. And Peter, the footman, barely out of his teens, his eyes wide. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small stature commanding attention. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and precise. "We are faced with a mystery. Mrs. Eleanor Vance is missing, and a glove stained with blood has been found in the library. Ask you now, when did each of you last see Mrs. Vance? And what were you doing between 4 and 4:30 this afternoon?" The responses came haltingly. Lady Ashford had been in the drawing room preparing for tea. Clara had been with her, arranging flowers. Major Caldwell claimed to have been in the billiard room, practicing shots. Dr. Pritchard had been in the library, cataloguing books, until just before the glove was found. Julian Trent said he had been in his room, reviewing legal documents. The staff's alibis were similarly mundane. Grayson and the maids were preparing the house. Mrs. Harrow was overseeing the kitchen. Mrs. Gibbs was cooking. Tompkins was in the garden, and Peter was polishing silver. Poirot listened, his head tilted, his eyes never leaving the speaker. When they finished, he nodded slowly. "Bon. Your accounts are noted. But I warn you,
The truth is like a puzzle. Each piece must fit perfectly. If one piece is false, the entire picture collapses. As the group dispersed, Hastings caught Poirot's arm. "What do you make of it, old chap?" "Mrs. Vance, gone without a trace. And that glove. It's devilishly odd." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Odd, yes, but not without purpose. The glove, the shawl, the locked window, they are clues, Hastings. But they are also distractions. Someone in this house wishes to mislead us, but Hercule Poirot is not so easily deceived." The evening settled over Blackthorn Grange, the shadows lengthening as the mystery deepened. Somewhere, Hastings thought, Mrs. Vance, or her fate,
now gathered for dinner, was a masterpiece of elegance. Crystal chandeliers casting prisms of light, a long mahogany table set with silver and porcelain, and tall windows framing the darkening Devon hills. Yet the atmosphere was heavy, the clink of cutlery and murmured pleasantries unable to mask the tension that clung to every guest like a second skin. The absence of Mrs. Eleanor Vance, coupled with a blood-stained glove, had cast a pall over the gathering, and all eyes seemed to drift toward Hercule Poirot, who sat at Lady Ashford's right, his demeanor as composed as ever. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated across from Poirot, observed his friend with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. Poirot's small, precise movements, adjusting his napkin, sipping his wine with deliberate care, betrayed nothing of the turmoil in the room. Yet Hastings knew that beneath the polished exterior, Poirot's mind was a whirlwind of observation, cataloguing every glance, every hesitation, every word. Lady Ashford, at the head of the table, maintained a veneer of hostess-like calm, though her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted her glass. "Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice steady but strained, "you have a reputation for unraveling the most perplexing mysteries. I trust you'll bring clarity to this troubling situation." Poirot inclined his head, his green eyes gleaming in the candlelight. "Madame, the trust you place in Hercule Poirot is not misplaced, but clarity, it comes only through order and method. I must ask questions, observe and listen. The truth, it hides in the smallest details." Major Ernest Caldwell, seated beside Clara Ashford, gave a hearty laugh that rang false. "Details, eh? Well, I say it's simple enough. Poor Mrs. Vance probably wandered off, got lost in the grounds, perhaps. No need for all this fuss." Clara's fork paused midway to her mouth, her eyes flashing. "Wandered off? Uncle Ernest, you saw the glove, and her shawl left on the floor. Eleanor wasn't the sort to just vanish." "Clara, my dear," Lady Ashford interjected, her tone sharp, "let us not speculate. Mr. Poirot will determine the facts." Dr. Simon Pritchard, his spectacles glinting, set down his knife with a clatter. "If I may, Lady Ashford, the facts are limited. I was in the library until just before 4, and saw nothing amiss. Mrs. Vance was in the drawing room when I passed through at 3:30. She seemed preoccupied, but alive and well." Julian Trent, the solicitor, spoke up, his voice smooth and measured. "And I, as I said, was in my room reviewing Sir Reginald's papers. I heard nothing unusual until Mrs. Vance in the drawing room just before 4. Dr. Pritchard, you confirm this at 3:30, and yet by 4:30 she is missing, her room disturbed. This is a window of mere minutes. Who then was in a position to act?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. The staff, standing discreetly along the walls, shifted uncomfortably. Grayson the butler cleared his throat. "If I may, sir." The staff were all accounted for, I was overseeing the tea service. Mrs. Harrow was in the kitchen with Mrs. Gibbs, and the maids were cleaning the east wing. Tompkins and Peter were outside, tending to the grounds and stables. Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled. Bon. But let us not forget the glove. It is silk, monogrammed with E.V., Mrs. Vance's initials. Yet it was found in the library, not her room, and the blood fresh, not dried. This suggests an event most recent. I must see the library again, and I will speak with each of you in turn. After dinner, Poirot led the way back to the library, Hastings at his side. The room was as they had left it, the blood-stained glove still lying on the floor, now cordoned off by a velvet rope at Poirot's insistence. The constable, a nervous young man named Harris, had arrived and was taking notes, his brow furrowed. "Nothing to report yet, Mr. Poirot," he said. "No sign of Mrs. Vance on the grounds, and no one saw her leave the house." "Merci, constable," Poirot replied, dismissing him with a wave. He knelt beside the glove once more, his magnifying glass in hand. "Hastings, observe the stain. It is not smeared, not splattered, but deliberate, as if placed with care. This is no accident." Hastings squinted, trying to follow Poirot's reasoning. "You mean someone put the blood there on purpose, to make us think there's been foul play?" "Précisément," Poirot said, rising. "But why? To frighten? To distract? Or to conceal something else? We must learn more about Mrs. Vance, her habits, her fears, her enemies." Their first interview was with Clara Ashford, who sat in a high-backed chair, her hands clasped tightly. "Eleanor was fragile," she said, her voice low. "She never recovered from my uncle's death. She lived here quietly, almost like a ghost. But she was kind, always asking about my studies in Paris. I can't imagine who would harm her." Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone remained precise. "Mademoiselle, did Mrs. Vance speak of any fears, any letters like those your aunt received?" Clara hesitated, her eyes darting to the side. "She mentioned something last week, about a letter she'd found in her room. Not addressed, just a note saying, 'The truth will come.' She thought it was a prank, but it upset her." Poirot's moustache twitched. "A letter, you say? Most curious. And where is this note now?" "I don't know," Clara admitted. "She said she burned it." The interviews continue, offering their version of the afternoon. Major Caldwell was bluff and dismissive, insisting he'd been alone in the billiard room. Dr. Pritchard was precise, almost too precise, recounting his movements with academic detachment. Julian Trent's answers were clipped, his demeanor cool, but guarded. The staff stories aligned with Grayson's, though the maid Ellen seemed nervous, her eyes avoiding Poirot's. As the night deepened, Poirot and Hastings retired to a small study to confer. "What do you make of it, Poirot?" Hastings asked, pouring himself a brandy. "Clara's story about the note, could it be connected to Lady Ashford's letters?" Poirot paced, his hands clasped behind his back. "It is possible, mon ami. The note, the glove, the shawl, they are threads in a tapestry, but the pattern, it is not yet clear. Mrs. Vance was a woman of secrets, I think. Her absence is no accident, but whether she is victim or architect, that remains to be seen." Hastings frowned. "Architect? You think she staged her own disappearance?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It is one possibility, but there are others. The blood, it is real, yet there is no body. The glove, it is hers, yet it is not in her room. And the alibis, too neat, too perfect. Someone lies, Hastings, and Hercule Poirot will find them." As they left the study, a faint sound reached them, a soft thud, like a door closing in the distance. Hastings started, but Poirot held up a hand, his head tilted. "Listen, mon ami. The house, it speaks, and we must learn its language." The night stretched on, the mystery of Blackthorn Grange growing ever more tangled. Somewhere hidden in the shadows of the estate,
The truth waited, and Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, piecing together the puzzle of Mrs. Vance's vanishing. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Blackthorn Grange, casting long shadows across the polished floors. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of dew-soaked roses from the gardens, but the oppressive weight of the previous evening's events lingered. Breakfast was a subdued affair, the clatter of porcelain and silver muted by the absence of Mrs. Eleanor Vance and the unanswered questions surrounding the blood-stained glove. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated at the dining table, noted the strained expressions of the guests. Clara Ashford's pale face, Major Caldwell's forced joviality, Dr. Pritchard's distracted scribbling, and Julian Trent's cool detachment. Lady Beatrice Ashford presided over the meal with a fragile composure, her eyes occasionally darting toward the door as if expecting news. Hercule Poirot, impeccable in his tailored suit, sipped his café au lait with an air of serene concentration.
Alibis, glances, and silences. The Belgian detective had announced his intention to interview each person individually, and the prospect had cast a pall over the table. "Mr. Poirot," Lady Ashford said, breaking the silence, "I trust you slept well, despite everything. Have you made progress in your inquiries?" Poirot set down his cup with deliberate care. "Madame, the night brings clarity to the mind of Hercule Poirot. I have considered the glove, the shawl, the note Mademoiselle Clara mentioned. Each is a piece of the puzzle, but the picture, it is not yet complete. Today I shall speak with each person in this house. The truth, it hides in the details." Major Caldwell snorted, buttering a piece of toast with unnecessary vigor. "Details, details! All this fuss over a glove and a missing woman. She'll turn up, mark my words. Probably wandered off in a fit of nerves." Clara's eyes flashed. "Uncle Ernest, that's cruel. Eleanor was fragile, yes, but not foolish. Something's happened to her, I know it." "Enough, Clara," Lady Ashford said sharply, though her voice trembled. "Mr. Poirot will uncover the truth. We must trust him." Poirot inclined his head, his mustache twitching slightly. "Merci, madame. And now, if you permit, I shall begin. Mademoiselle Clara, will you join me in the study?" The study, a small room lined with oak paneling and leather-bound books, was an ideal setting for Poirot's interrogations. A single window overlooked the rose garden, and a heavy desk provided a stage for his methodical approach. Clara sat across from him, her hands twisting her pearl necklace, her eyes wary. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began, his voice soft but precise, "you spoke of a note Mrs. Vance received, one that said, 'The truth will come.' Tell me more. Her demeanor, her words, every detail, s'il vous plaît." Clara swallowed, her gaze flickering to the window. "It was last week after dinner. Eleanor was in the drawing-room reading. She looked troubled. I asked if something was wrong, and she showed me the note. It was written in black ink on plain paper, no signature. She said she found it under her door. She laughed it off, but her hands were shaking." "And you say she burned it?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Yes," Clara replied. "She threw it into the fire right then. Said it was nonsense, probably a servant's prank. But she was frightened, Mr. Poirot. I could see it in her eyes." Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. "And her habits? Did she often walk alone or receive visitors?" Clara shook her head. "Eleanor kept to herself. She rarely left the Grange, except for church on Sundays. She'd spend hours in her room or the garden, reading or
"See or hear anything unusual?"
Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on her necklace.
"No, nothing. I was arranging flowers. Aunt Beatrice was writing letters. It was all so ordinary, until Grayson caught us to the library."
Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Merci, mademoiselle. You may go." Next came Major Caldwell, whose hearty demeanor seemed strained in the confines of the study. He sat heavily, his ruddy face flushed. "Look here, Poirot. I'm a straightforward man. No use for all this cloak and dagger nonsense. I was in the billiard room, as I said, knocking about a few balls. Didn't see a soul." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A solitary game, Major? Most unusual for a man of your sociable nature. Tell me, what was your relationship with Mrs. Vance?" Caldwell's face reddened further. "Relationship? None to speak of. She was Reggie's sister, a bit of a recluse, kept to herself, always moping. I tried to cheer her up now and then, but she wasn't interested." "And yet," Poirot said, his voice soft, "your eyes followed her in the drawing room yesterday. I observed it." Caldwell spluttered. "Nonsense! I was just concerned, that's all. She looked peaky." Poirot let the silence stretch, his gaze unwavering. "Bon. And at 4 o'clock, you heard nothing? No cry, no footsteps?" "Nothing," Caldwell said firmly, though his fingers drummed on the arm of the chair. The interviews continued through the morning. Dr. Simon Pritchard was precise, almost mechanical, recounting his time in the library, cataloguing Sir Reginald's collection. "I left at 10 minutes to 4, he said, adjusting his spectacles. "I saw Mrs. Vance in the drawing room as I passed through. She was by the window, reading. I didn't speak to her." "And the glove?" Poirot asked. "You did not see it in the library?" Pritchard shook his head. "No, it wasn't there when I left. I'd have noticed something like that." Julian Trent, the solicitor, was next, his answers clipped and guarded. "I was in my room, reviewing Sir Reginald's will. I heard nothing until Clara's cry about the glove. Mrs. Vance and I rarely spoke. She had little interest in legal matters." The staff followed, their accounts consistent but tinged with unease. Grayson reiterated his duties overseeing tea. Mrs. Harrow, her supervision of the kitchen. The maids, Ellen and Rose, were nervous, their voices barely above whispers as they described cleaning the East Wing. Mrs. Gibbs, the cook, was indignant at the suggestion of anything.
Hastings asked, lighting a cigarette. "Everyone's accounted for, but someone's lying, aren't they?" Poirot plucked a rose petal, examining it as if it held the key to the mystery. "Oui, mon ami. The alibis, they are too perfect, like a play rehearsed. But there is a crack in the facade. The glove. It was placed in the library after Dr. Pritchard left, yet before Clara found Mrs. Vance's room empty. This is a matter of minutes, 10, perhaps 15. Someone moved swiftly, with purpose." Hastings frowned. "And the blood? You said it was deliberate. Could it be a ruse?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "But there is something else. The note Clara mentioned. The truth will come. It echoes Lady Ashford's anonymous letters. This is no coincidence. Someone in this house is playing a game, Hastings, and Hercule Poirot will discover the rules." As they returned to the house, a maid, Ellen, approached, her face pale. "Mr. Poirot, sir, you should see this. I found it in the laundry, hidden in a basket." She held out a small, crumpled handkerchief, stained with what appeared to be blood. Poirot took it, his expression grave. "Merci, Hélène. This is most significant. The plot, it thickens." The handkerchief, like the glove, was a clue. But to what? Hastings felt the mystery tightening around them, and Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, unravelling the threads of deception. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The discovery of the blood-stained handkerchief, presented by the trembling maid Ellen, sent a fresh ripple of unease through Blackthorn Grange. The late morning light streamed through the study's window, illuminating the delicate linen square in Hercule Poirot's gloved hands. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the desk, felt a familiar thrill of anticipation as Poirot's green eyes narrowed, his fingers tracing the edges of the handkerchief with the precision of a surgeon. The monogram, a faint EV embroidered in silk thread, matched the glove found in the library, deepening the mystery of Mrs. Eleanor Vance's disappearance. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low, "this handkerchief, it is no mere accident. Like the glove, it is placed to be found. But by whom, and to what end?" He turned to Ellen, who stood nervously by the door, her hands twisting her apron. "Mademoiselle, where exactly did you find this?" Ellen swallowed, her eyes darting to the floor. "In the laundry basket, sir, in the basement. It was tucked inside a tablecloth, one used in the dining room last night. I only noticed it because the stain caught."
Hastings is a red herring, a distraction meant to lead us astray. But Hercule Poirot is not so easily misled. Hastings frowned, lighting a cigarette to steady his nerves. "A red herring? You mean someone's deliberately planting these clues? But why? To make us think Mrs. Vance is dead?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, placing the handkerchief in a small envelope. "Or perhaps to conceal a different truth. The blood, it is real, but its purpose is not yet clear. We must proceed with care." The morning's interviews had left Poirot with a wealth of information, yet the puzzle remained incomplete. He decided to shift his approach, focusing on the physical evidence and the layout of the Grange. With Constable Harris, a diligent but overwhelmed young man trailing behind, Poirot and Hastings returned to the library. The room was as they had left it. The blood-stained glove still cordoned off, its silk gleaming faintly in the sunlight. Poirot paced the room, his small frame moving with deliberate grace. "Observe, Hastings. The glove was found here, near the overturned chair. The chair, it is heavy, oak, not easily moved. Yet it is tipped, as if in haste. But there is no sign of a struggle. No scratches on the floor, no books disturbed. This suggests the scene was arranged." Harris, scribbling in his notebook, looked up. "Arranged, sir? You mean someone staged it?" "Précisément," Poirot replied. "The glove, the chair, they are props in a play. But the blood, it is real. We must test it, Constable. Can you arrange for an analysis?" Harris nodded, though his expression betrayed his uncertainty. "I'll send it to the station, Mr. Poirot, but it'll take a day or two." "Very well," Poirot said. "In the meantime, we must consider the alibis. Each person claims to have been occupied at 4 o'clock. Yet Mrs. Vance vanished within that narrow window. Someone, or perhaps more than one, is not truthful." Their next stop was the basement laundry, a dim, cavernous space filled with the scent of soap and damp linen. The basket Ellen had mentioned stood against a wall, its contents a jumble of tablecloths and napkins. Poirot examined it closely, his magnifying glass glinting as he peered into the folds of fabric. "No other stains, no other clues," he murmured. "The handkerchief was placed with care, meant to be found by a diligent maid." Hastings, peering over his shoulder, ventured a theory. "Could Mrs. Vance have left it herself? If she's hiding, maybe she's trying to send a message." Poirot's moustache twitched. "An interesting thought, mon ami, but unlikely. If Mrs. Vance wished to communicate, she would not resort to such theatrics."
No, this is the work of someone who wishes to confuse us.
But you. This uncertainty is unbearable. Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but commanding. Madame, I have found a second clue. A handkerchief stained with blood, bearing Mrs. Vance's initials. It was hidden in the laundry, discovered by the maid, Ellen. A collective gasp rose from the group. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. Major Caldwell's face reddened, and he muttered something about damned nonsense. Dr. Pritchard adjusted his spectacles, his pen scratching furiously. Julian Trent's expression remained impassive, though his fingers twitched at his side. "This is monstrous!" Lady Ashford exclaimed. "First the glove, now this? What does it mean, Mr. Poirot?" "It means, madam," Poirot said, "that someone in this house is weaving a web of deception. The glove, the handkerchief, they are designed to suggest a crime. Yet we have no body, no proof of death. I ask you all to consider. What secrets did Mrs. Vance hold? Who among you feared her knowledge?" The question hung in the air unanswered. Major Caldwell cleared his throat. "Look here, Poirot, you're barking up the wrong tree. Eleanor was a quiet sort, kept to herself. No one had reason to harm her." "On the contrary, Major," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. "Everyone has secrets, and secrets breed motives. I shall discover them." To test his theory, Poirot requested a tour of the Granger's grounds, suspecting that Mrs. Vance's disappearance might involve an escape or concealment outside. Accompanied by Hastings, Constable Harris, and Tompkins, the gardener, he walked the perimeter of the estate. The gardens were meticulously kept, the rose beds vibrant, the gravel paths raked smooth. Yet Poirot's attention was drawn to a small gate at the edge of the property, half hidden by ivy. "Tompkins," Poirot said, "this gate, where does it lead?" "To the lane, sir," Tompkins replied, scratching his head. "It's rarely used. Locked usually, though the key's kept in the shed." Poirot examined the gate, noting a faint scuff mark on the gravel nearby. "And when did you last check the lock?" "Yesterday morning, sir," Tompkins said. "It was secure then." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Bon, but we shall check it now." To his surprise, the gate swung open with a gentle push, its lock unfastened. A faint smile played on his lips. "Most interesting. Someone has used this gate recently." Hastings, catching the glint in Poirot's eye, felt a surge of excitement. "You think Mrs. Vance left through here? Or someone took her?" "Patience, Hastings," Poirot said. "The gate, it is another piece of the puzzle, but it is not enough. We must return to the house and confront—" "Wishes us to believe Mrs. Vance is a victim. But I suspect a deeper game. I ask you now, who saw Mrs. Vance after 4 o'clock? And who can account for the blood?" The room erupted in protestations. Major Caldwell insisted he'd been in the billiard room, Dr. Pritchard in his room, Clara with her aunt. Julian Trent repeated his story of reviewing papers. The staff echoed their earlier alibis, though Ellen's voice trembled and Peter's eyes darted nervously. Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. "Enough. The truth, it is like a shadow. It moves when you chase it. But Hercule Poirot will catch it. Tomorrow we shall dig deeper." As the guests dispersed, Hastings leaned close. "You're stirring them up, Poirot. Someone's bound to slip." "Oui, mon ami," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "The red herrings multiply, but they cannot hide the truth forever. The little grey cells, they are never deceived." The day closed with Blackthorn Grange shrouded in suspicion. The mystery of Mrs. Vance's fate growing ever more tangled. Somewhere, Poirot knew, A lie was waiting to be exposed. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The afternoon sun hung low over Blackthorn Grange, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns and bathing the estate in a golden glow that belied the chill of suspicion within its walls. The discovery of the blood-stained handkerchief and the unlocked garden gate had deepened the mystery of Mrs. Eleanor Vance's disappearance, and the guests and staff moved through the house with the wariness of actors unsure of their lines. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever attuned to the mood of a room, felt the tension as a palpable force, like a taut wire ready to snap. Hercule Poirot, however, remained a picture of composure, his small frame seated in the study, his fingers steepled as he reviewed his notebook, its pages filled with meticulous observations. "Mon ami," Poirot said, glancing up at Hastings. "The puzzle, it begins to take shape. The glove, the handkerchief, the gate, they are not random. They are deliberate, placed to guide us or to mislead us. But there is one detail, one small inconsistency that begins to shine like a beacon." Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "An inconsistency? What have you spotted, Poirot?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of quiet satisfaction. "Patience, Hastings. It is a matter of timing and placement. But first, we must examine the scene of the disappearance with fresh eyes. Come, let us return to Mrs. Vance's room." The two made their way to the second floor, where Mrs. Vance's chamber remained untouched since Clara's on the hairbrush, its bristles holding a few strands of grey hair. "Hastings," he said, his voice low, "observed the brush. It is silver, finely crafted, and yet—" He lifted it carefully, turning it in the light. "There is a smudge here, on the handle. Not dust, not polish, but something else. Oil, perhaps, or cream." Hastings squinted, trying to follow Poirot's reasoning. Oil? Could it be from her hands? Or someone else's? "Précisément," Poirot replied. "But Mrs. Vance, she was a woman of delicate habits, no? Her hands, they would not leave such a mark. And look." He pointed to the dressing table, where a small jar of hand cream stood, its lid slightly ajar. "This cream, it is undisturbed, no fingerprints, no smudges. Yet the brush, it tells a different story." Poirot moved to the window, his eyes narrowing as he examined the latch. "And here, another detail. The curtain, it is askew, yes, but the latch is locked from the inside, as we noted. Yet there is a faint scratch here on the sill, not deep, but recent. Something brushed against it, a shoe, perhaps, or a tool." Hastings frowned, struggling to keep up. "A tool? You think someone tampered with the window?" "Not tampered, mon ami," Poirot said, "but touched. The window was not opened, but someone stood here, perhaps to look out, or to be seen." He turned, his gaze sweeping the room. "This room, it is a stage, and the props have been arranged with care. The shawl, the glove, the brush, they are meant to tell a story. But whose story?" Their inspection was interrupted by a knock at the door. Constable Harris entered, his young face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Poirot, we've had a development. One of the maids, Rose, says she saw something yesterday afternoon, just before 4. She didn't mention it earlier because she was frightened." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Bon, bring her to me, constable, at once." Rose, a slight girl with wide eyes and trembling hands, was ushered into the study moments later. She stood before Poirot, her apron clutched tightly, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Sir, I'm sorry I didn't speak up before," she whispered.
I was scared, and I thought it wasn't important.
Everything is important, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently. Tell me what you saw. Rose took a shaky breath.
It was just before 4, sir, when I was dusting the corridor near the library. I saw Mrs. Vance walking toward the back staircase, the one that leads to the garden. She was moving quickly, like she was in a hurry. She had her shawl over her arm, and she was carrying a small—
And you saw no one else? Poirot pressed. No one following her? No one near the staircase? Rose shook her head. No, sir. The corridor was empty. I went back to my work, and then I heard Miss Clara's cry about the glove. Poirot nodded, dismissing her with a kind smile. Merci, Rose. You have been most helpful. As the maid left, Hastings turned to Poirot, his brow furrowed. A bag? That's new. Could you have been planning to leave? But why the glove? The blood? Poirot paced, his hands clasped behind his back. The bag, it is significant. If Mrs. Vance was preparing to flee, it suggests she knew of danger. But the glove, the handkerchief, they are theatrical, meant to confuse. And the smudge on the brush, the scratch on the sill, they point to someone else's presence in this room. Determined to test his growing suspicions, Poirot requested a meeting with the staff in the servants' hall. The group assembled uneasily. Grayson, the butler, his face impassive. Mrs. Harrow, the housekeeper, her lips pursed. Mrs. Gibbs, the cook, wiping her hands on her apron. Tompkins, the gardener, shifting uncomfortably. Peter, the footman, his eyes darting nervously. And Ellen and Rose, both pale and subdued. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice clear. A small detail has come to light. A smudge on Mrs. Vance's hairbrush, a scratch on her windowsill. These suggest someone entered her room, perhaps to stage her disappearance. I ask you now, has anyone noticed anything unusual in the house yesterday? Tools misplaced, doors unlocked, or perhaps a stranger? The staff exchanged glances, their silence heavy. Finally, Mrs. Harrow spoke, her voice sharp. The house runs smoothly, Mr. Poirot. I'd know if anything was amiss. The maids are thorough and the doors are locked each night. And yet, Poirot said, a gate was found unlocked, a handkerchief hidden in the laundry. Someone is not as thorough as you believe. Peter, the footman, cleared his throat, his face flushed. Sir, I did notice something. Yesterday morning, when I was polishing the silver, I saw a man in the lane beyond the garden gate. He was just standing there, watching the house. I thought he was a vagrant, but he was dressed well, dark coat, hat pulled low. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A man, you say, and you did not report this? Peter shrank under his gaze. I didn't think it mattered, sir. He was gone when I looked again. Everything matters, Poirot said, his tone firm. This man, he may be a key. Describe him further, if you please. Peter stammered. Tall, sir, lean. I couldn't see his face clearly, but he had a scar on his hand. I saw it when he adjusted his glove. Poirot nodded. His mind. They mean, mon ami, Poirot said, that we are dealing with a mind both clever and cautious. The smudge, it suggests someone handled the brush after Mrs. Vance. The scratch, it hints at a presence at the window. And the man in the lane, he is a shadow, but a shadow with a scar. We are close, Hastings, to a truth that someone wishes to bury. The day drew on, the mystery of Blackthorn Grange tightening like a noose. Poirot's little grey cells were alight, piecing together the delicate clues that would unravel the deception at the heart of the estate. Chapter 7. More lies surface. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Blackthorn Grange, casting intricate patterns on the polished floors, yet the beauty of the estate could not dispel the growing unease that permeated its halls. The discovery of the smudged hairbrush, the scratched windowsill, and the mysterious man in the lane
had added new layers to the enigma of Mrs. Eleanor Vance's disappearance. Captain Arthur Hastings, pacing the drawing room, felt the weight of the mystery pressing upon him. A puzzle with too many pieces that refused to fit. Hercule Poirot, seated in a high-backed chair, his small hands folded neatly, seemed untouched by the tension. His green eyes gleaming with the quiet intensity of a man who saw order where others saw chaos. "Mon ami," Poirot said, glancing at Hastings. "The threads of this mystery, they begin to weave together, but they are tangled with lies. The smudge, the scratch, the man with the scar, these are not accidents. They are signs of a mind at work, a mind that seeks to conceal and confuse. But Hercule Poirot, he sees through the deception." Hastings stopped pacing, his brow furrowed. "You're certain someone's lying then? But who? Everyone's alibi seems solid. And yet, that handkerchief, the glove, it's all so theatrical." "Précisément," Poirot replied, his mustache twitching. "It is a performance, Hastings, but not all the actors know their roles. Today, we shall uncover more of their secrets. The lies, they surface like bubbles in a stream." Poirot's next move was to request a private conversation with Lady Beatrice Ashford, whose composure had begun to fray under the strain of the past day. They met in the library, the very room where the blood-stained glove had been found, its heavy atmosphere a fitting backdrop for the discussion. Lady Ashford sat rigidly, her silver hair catching the light, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Madame," Poirot began, his voice gentle but firm, "you spoke of anonymous letters, threats of a reckoning. I must know more. Have you received others, beyond those you mentioned? And what of Mrs. Vance? Did she confide in you about her fears?" Lady Ashford's lips tightened, and for a moment Hastings thought she might refuse to answer. Then she sighed, her shoulders sat.
Over the past month. All in the same hand. Black ink. No signature. They spoke of secrets buried too long and a price to be paid. I thought them the work of a spiteful neighbor, perhaps, or a disgruntled servant. I showed them to no one, not even Elena. "And Mrs. Vance?" Poirot pressed. "Did she speak of similar threats?" Lady Ashford hesitated, her eyes flickering to the window. "She hinted at something a week ago. She said she felt watched, as if someone were prying into her life. I thought it was her nerves. She was always delicate, even before my husband's death, but now—" Her voice faltered, and she looked away. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "Madame, you must be frank. Was there a secret, a matter between you and Mrs. Vance? Or perhaps involving your late husband, Sir Reginald?" Lady Ashford's face paled, but she shook her head. "No, nothing specific. Eleanor was devoted to Reginald, and his death broke her. If she had secrets, she kept them even from me." Poirot nodded, though his eyes suggested he was not entirely convinced. "Merci, madame. Your candor is noted. But I warn you, the truth will not remain hidden." The interview with Lady Ashford set the tone for the day, as Poirot methodically sought out each guest and staff member, probing for cracks in their stories. Major Ernest Caldwell was next, his bluff demeanor tinged with irritation as he faced Poirot in the study. "Look here, Poirot," he said, his voice gruff. "I've told you all I know. I was in the billiard room, alone, at 4 o'clock. No one can prove otherwise." "Indeed, Major," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. "But let us consider your relationship with Mrs. Vance. You described her as moping, yet you were seen watching her closely in the drawing room. Was there perhaps a matter between you? A disagreement? A debt?" Caldwell's face reddened, his hands clenching. "That's preposterous. I barely spoke to the woman. She was Reggie's sister, nothing more. If I looked at her, it was out of pity. She was a shadow of herself." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Pity, you say, yet your eyes, they lingered." And I have learned, Major, that you and Sir Reginald had a falling out before his death. A matter of money, perhaps? Caldwell's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Hastings thought he might storm out. That's old history, he said finally. Reggie and I had words over an investment, nothing serious. It was settled years ago. Bon, Poirot said, though his tone suggested he was far from satisfied. But history, Major, it has a way of resurfacing. Dr. Simon Pritchard was next, his scholarly detachment a stark contrast to Caldwell's bluster. He sat with his notebook open, his pen poised, as if recording nothing.
And yet, Poirot said, you are a man of observation, Doctor. You catalogue books with precision. Did you not notice Mrs. Vance's state of mind? Or perhaps a detail in the library, a book out of place, a sound? Pritchard adjusted his spectacles, his expression guarded. Mrs. Vance was quiet, as always. As for the library, it was in order when I left. The glove appeared after I departed. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And your work here, Doctor, what is its purpose? Sir Reginald's library, it is valuable, no? Were there documents, perhaps, that Mrs. Vance might have seen? Pritchard's pen froze, and a flicker of unease crossed his face. The library is a historian's dream, rare manuscripts, first editions, but nothing that would concern Mrs. Vance. She had no interest in such things. The interviews with the staff revealed further tensions. Ellen, the maid, admitted to overhearing a heated conversation between Mrs. Vance and Julian Trent 2 days prior, though she couldn't make out the words. They were in the conservatory, she said, her voice trembling. Mrs. Vance sounded upset, and Mr. Trent was sharp with her. When confronted, Trent's cool demeanor faltered slightly. A minor matter, he said, his voice clipped. Mrs. Vance had questions about her brother's estate. I assured her all was in order. But it was Clara Ashford who provided the most startling revelation. In a private moment with Poirot, her eyes red from unshed tears, she confessed, I didn't tell you everything, Mr. Poirot. Eleanor, she told me something the day before she vanished. She said she'd found a letter, not the one I mentioned, but another, hidden in a book in the library. It was from Uncle Reginald, written before he died. It mentioned a betrayal and someone he trusted. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A letter, you say? And where is it now? Clara shook her head. She wouldn't show it to me. She said it was too dangerous. She was going to confront someone, but she wouldn't say who. As the day waned, Poirot and Hastings retreated to the garden, where the roses glowed in the fading light. This letter, Hastings, Poirot said, it is the key. A betrayal, a trusted confidant. It points to a motive. Someone in this house feared what Mrs. Vance knew. Hastings lit a cigarette, his mind racing. But who? Caldwell? Trent? Or someone else entirely? Poirot plucked a rose petal, his expression thoughtful. The lies, they multiply, but they cannot hide forever. The letter, the smudge, the man with the scar, they are connected. And Hercule Poirot will find the thread that binds them. The evening settled over Blackthorn Grange, the air thick with secrets. The truth, Poirot knew, was closer, but it was guarded by a web of deception that would require all. Blackthorn Grange, the fading light weaving shadows through the rose gardens and along the stone corridors. The weight of Mrs. Eleanor Vance's disappearance, now compounded by the revelation of a hidden letter and a web of lies, had driven a wedge of suspicion among the guests and staff. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, and Captain Arthur Hastings, pacing the drawing room, felt the tension like a storm about to break. Hercule Poirot, seated by the fireplace, his small hands folded neatly, appeared as calm as ever, but his green eyes burned with a quiet intensity, as if he sensed the moment when the truth would begin to unravel.
Mon ami, Poirot said, glancing at Hastings. We approach a turning point. The lies, they grow heavy, and someone in this house will soon falter under their weight. The letter Clara mentioned, this betrayal of Sir Reginald's, it is the heart of the matter. We must press further, and the truth, it will surface. Hastings stopped pacing, his brow furrowed. You think someone's about to crack, Poirot? But who? Clara's already told us about the letter, and the others are sticking to their stories. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of quiet certainty. We, Hastings. But the heart, it betrays what the lips conceal. Today we shall apply pressure, and the cracks, they will appear. The day began, with Poirot requesting a private audience with Julian Trent, the solicitor whose cool demeanor had thus far deflected scrutiny. They met in the study, the room's oak paneling absorbing the light, creating an atmosphere of intimacy and interrogation. Trent sat stiffly, his sharp features composed, but his fingers tapped lightly on the arm of the chair, a small tell that Poirot noted with interest. Mr. Trent, Poirot began, his voice soft but piercing, you have been most reserved about your dealings with Mrs. Vance. Yet the maid Ellen overheard a heated exchange between you and her in the conservatory 2 days before her disappearance. She was upset, you were sharp. What was the nature of this conversation? Trent's eyes narrowed, but his voice remained steady. A misunderstanding, Mr. Poirot. Mrs. Vance had questions about her brother's will, minor details about her inheritance. She was emotional, as she often was. I clarified the matter, and we parted. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze unrelenting. And yet, Mr. Trent, Clara Ashford speaks of a letter found by Mrs. Vance, mentioning a betrayal by someone Sir Reginald trusted. As his solicitor, you were such a person, no?
Way of emerging like a flower through stone. If you conceal it, it will only grow heavier. As Trent left, his composure intact but strained, Poirot turned to Hastings. He knows more than he admits, mon ami. His control, it is a mask, but it is slipping. The next interview was with Dr. Simon Pritchard, whose scholarly detachment seemed increasingly forced. In the library, surrounded by the very books he had been cataloguing, he sat with his notebook open, his pen scratching nervously. Mr. Poirot, he said, adjusting his spectacles, I've told you everything. I was in my room after leaving the library. I saw nothing, heard nothing. And yet, Poirot said, his voice soft, you are a man of details, Doctor. You noticed the grain of a page, the ink of a manuscript. Did you not notice Mrs. Vance's distress? Or perhaps a book in the library, misplaced, containing a letter? Pritchard's pen stopped, and his eyes darted to the shelves. A letter? I don't know what you mean. The library is vast, and I've only begun my work. If Mrs. Vance found something, it was not through me. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And yet, Doctor, you were in the library until 10 minutes to 4, when the glove appeared. A letter hidden in a book would be a thing you might notice, no? Pritchard's face paled, and his voice trembled slightly. I swear, Mr. Poirot, I know nothing of any letter. My work is academic, not personal. But as Pritchard spoke, his hands betrayed him, clutching the notebook tightly, and Poirot's eyes missed nothing. Merci, Doctor, he said, dismissing him. But the truth, it is not so easily hidden. The turning point came unexpectedly, late in the afternoon as Poirot and Hastings walked the rose garden, discussing the case. Clara Ashford approached, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. Mr. Poirot, she said, her voice breaking, I can't keep silent any longer. I know something I should have told you before.
Poirot stopped, his expression gentle but expectant. "Mademoiselle, speak. The truth, it is a burden you need not carry alone." Clara took a shaky breath, her hands twisting her pearl necklace. "It's about Eleanor and Uncle Reginald's will. She told me the day before she vanished that she'd found something in the library. A letter, yes, but also a codicil to the will hidden in a book. It changed everything, she said. It mentioned a secret beneficiary, someone outside the family. She was terrified, Mr. Poirot. She said she was going to confront the person named in it." Poirot's eyes gleamed, his voice soft but urgent. "A codicil, you say? And did she name this beneficiary?" Clara shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, she wouldn't tell me. She said it was too dangerous, that it would ruin everything. But she was going to meet someone that afternoon, at 4 o'clock in the garden. That's why she had the
Bag, I think. She was preparing to leave if things went wrong." Hastings, standing nearby, felt a jolt of excitement. "A meeting in the garden? That explains the unlocked gate. But who was she meeting?" Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Mademoiselle, this is most significant. You are certain of the time, 4 o'clock?" "Yes," Clara said, her voice trembling. She looked at her watch before she left the drawing room. "I thought she was just going for a walk, but now I'm so afraid for her." Poirot placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Courage, mademoiselle. You have done well to speak. This codicil, it changes the motive. Someone in this house had reason to fear its discovery." As Clara left, sobbing quietly, Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression grave. "The codicil, Hastings. It is the key. A secret beneficiary, a betrayal. This is why Mrs. Vance vanished. Someone wished to silence her, or to make it appear so." Hastings lit a cigarette, his mind racing. But who? Trent, as the solicitor, would know about the will. Or Caldwell. He admitted to a falling out with Sir Reginald. Or even Pritchard poking around in the library. Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing. "All are possible, mon ami. But there is another possibility. A shadow. The man with the scar, seen by Peter. He is not of this house, yet he is connected. We must find this codicil, and we must watch closely, for the one who breaks will reveal all." As the evening settled over Blackthorn Grange, the air grew heavier, the secrets of the house pressing against its walls. Clara's confession had cracked the facade, and Poirot knew the truth was closer than ever. The little grey cells were at work, piecing together the clues, the glove, the handkerchief, the smudge, the scratch, and now the codicil, that would unravel the mystery of Mrs. Vance's fate. Chapter 9. The Trap. The evening at Blackthorn Grange descended with a chill that seemed to seep from the very stones of the estate, as if the house itself were conspiring to guard its secrets. The revelations of the day, Clara's confession about the codicil, the mysterious letter, and the planned meeting in the garden, had tightened the noose of suspicion around the guests and staff. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the drawing-room window, watched the shadows lengthen across the rose garden, his mind churning with the puzzle's complexity. Hercule Poirot, seated in his usual high-backed chair, exuded an air of calm determination, his green eyes glinting with the certainty that the moment for action had arrived. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low but resonant, "we are at a crossroads. The codicil, the letter, the man with the scar, these are not mere clues but weapons in a game of deception. Tonight we shall set a trap, and the guilty they will betray themselves." Hastings, "I don't know if Mrs. Vance is alive, or otherwise." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of quiet confidence. "Precisement, Hastings. The uncertainty, it is our ally. The one who knows the truth will fear exposure, and fear, it makes the hand tremble, the eye wander. We shall gather them all, and we shall apply pressure." Poirot's plan was to convene everyone in the library, the very room where the blood-stained glove had been found, under the pretense of sharing new evidence. He instructed Lady Beatrice Ashford to summon the guests and staff after dinner,
ensuring no one could excuse themselves. The atmosphere at the meal was strained, the clink of silverware and forced pleasantries barely masking the undercurrent of dread. Clara's eyes were red-rimmed, her hands restless. Major Caldwell's laughter was hollow, his face flushed. Dr. Pritchard scribbled in his notebook, his movements jerky. Julian Trent's cool facade seemed to waver, his gaze darting to the door. The staff, serving silently, were no less tense. Ellen's hands trembled as she poured wine, and Peter's eyes avoided Poirot's. After dinner, the group assembled in the library, the heavy shelves and flickering candlelight creating an almost theatrical stage. The blood-stained glove, still cordoned off, lay like a grim sentinel on the floor. Poirot stood at the center, his small frame commanding the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and deliberate, "we are gathered to confront the mystery of Mrs. Eleanor Vance's disappearance. The glove, the handkerchief, the unlocked gate, the codicil, these are pieces of a puzzle, but they are not the whole. Tonight I shall reveal a new piece of evidence, one that will shake the foundation of this deception." A murmur rippled through the room. Lady Ashford's face paled, her fingers tightening on her brooch. Clara clutched her pearl necklace, her breath uneven. Major Caldwell shifted uncomfortably, his ruddy cheeks flushed. Dr. Pritchard's pen froze mid-stroke, and Julian Trent's eyes narrowed, his posture rigid. Poirot paused, letting the tension build. "This afternoon, I discovered hidden in this very library a fragment of the letter Mrs. Vance found, the one mentioning a betrayal. It was tucked inside a volume of Shakespeare, a play most apt, Othello, a tale of trust betrayed. The fragment names a person, someone in this room, who stood to lose everything if the codicil to Sir Reginald's will was revealed." The room erupted in gasps and protests. Major Caldwell's voice boomed, "That's preposterous, Poirot. You can't go accusing people without proof." "Proof, Major?" Poirot. "The critical hour of Mrs. Vance's disappearance, and I shall ask you to swear to it, on your honor." The challenge hung in the air, and Poirot's gaze moved from face to face, noting every reaction. Lady Ashford's composure faltered, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. Clara's hands shook, her eyes darting to her aunt. Major Caldwell's face reddened further, his fists clenching. Dr. Pritchard adjusted his spectacles, his fingers twitching. Julian Trent remained still, but a bead of sweat glistened on his temple. Grayson, the butler, stepped forward, his voice steady. "I was overseeing the tea service as I said, sir. I swear it." Mrs. Harrow followed, her tone sharp. "I was in the kitchen with Mrs. Gibbs. I'll swear to that." One by one, the staff reiterated their alibis, their voices a mix of defiance and fear. But when it came to the guests, the cracks began to show. Major Caldwell, his voice gruff, repeated his story of the billiard room, but his eyes avoided Poirot's. Dr. Pritchard's account of leaving the library at 10 minutes to 4 was precise, but his hands betrayed a nervous tremor. Julian Trent's response was clipped, his gaze cold, but his fingers tapped rhythmically on his knee. Clara was the last to speak, her voice trembling. "I was with Aunt Beatrice, arranging flowers. But I didn't tell you everything. I saw Eleanor leave the drawing room at 4, heading toward the garden. I thought she was just going for a walk, but now, I'm so sorry, Mr. Poirot. I should have followed her." The room fell silent, the weight of Clara's admission settling over them. Lady Ashford reached for her niece's hand, her face pale. "Clara, why didn't you say this before?" "I was scared," Clara whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I thought I'd made a mistake, that it was my fault she's gone." Poirot raised a hand, his voice gentle but firm. Mademoiselle, your honesty is a step toward the truth. But there is more. The codicil. It names a beneficiary who would disrupt the inheritance of this estate. Someone in this room knows who that person is and why Mrs. Vance had to be silenced. The accusation struck like a thunderbolt. Major Caldwell leapt to his feet, his face crimson. "This is outrageous, Poirot. You're accusing us without evidence. I won't stand for it." "Sit, Major," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the outburst. "The evidence, it is in your fear. And you, Mr. Trent, your silence, it speaks louder than words. Tell me, what did Mrs. Vance ask you in the conservatory? Was it about the codicil?" Trent's composure cracked, his voice rising. "I told you it was about the will. She was confused, emotional. I had nothing to do with her disappearance." But Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Pritchard, whose notebook had fallen to the floor, his hands
"Know every book in this library. Did you find the codicil? Did you know what Mrs. Vance discovered?"
Pritchard's face drained of color, his voice barely a whisper.
I didn't. I swear I didn't touch it."
The room seemed to hold its breath, the tension palpable. Poirot stepped forward, his small frame commanding.
"Someone in this room knows the truth. The man with the scar, seen in the lane. Does he work for one of you? Is he the key to this deception? Speak now, or the trap will close."
No one spoke, but the silence was deafening, filled with the weight of unspoken secrets. Hastings, watching from the side, saw the flicker of fear in every face, and he knew Poirot's trap had worked, not in confessions, but in the cracks it had exposed. As the group dispersed, their faces pale and their steps unsteady, Poirot turned to Hastings. "The trap, mon ami, it has caught something. The guilty, they are nervous now. Tomorrow we shall find the codicil, and the truth will be ours." The night closed over Blackthorn Grange, the library shadows hiding the truth that Poirot was determined to uncover. The little grey cells were at work, and the trap was set. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The morning light broke over Blackthorn Grange with a deceptive calm, the golden rays filtering through the heavy drapes of the library, where the blood-stained glove still lay as a grim reminder of the mystery that gripped the estate. The tension from the previous night's confrontation lingered, a palpable force that seemed to tighten around the guests and staff like a noose. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the library's tall windows, felt a mix of anticipation and dread, knowing that Hercule Poirot was poised to unravel the truth. Poirot himself stood at the center of the room, his small frame radiating an air of quiet triumph, his green eyes gleaming with the certainty of a man who had pieced together the final fragments of a complex puzzle. "Mon ami," Poirot said, turning to Hastings, "the moment has come. The glove, the handkerchief, the codicil, the man with the scar. These are not mere clues, but threads in a tapestry of deception. Today, Hercule Poirot will reveal the truth of Mrs. Eleanor Vance's disappearance, and the guilty, they shall be exposed." Hastings, his brow furrowed, lit a cigarette to steady his nerves. "You've got it all figured out, Poirot. But how? We still haven't found the codicil, and there's no body. How can you be sure?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of quiet satisfaction. "The little grey cells, Hastings, they see what the eyes cannot. The codicil, it is the heart of this mystery, but it is the lies, the contradictions that have led me to the truth. Gather the others, s'il vous plaît. We shall meet here, in the library, at once." The guests and staff assembled with a mixture of reluctance and fear, their faces pale in the morning light. Lady Beatrice Ashford stood by the fireplace, her posture rigid, her hands clasped tightly. Clara Ashford sat close to her aunt, her pearl necklace twisted in her fingers, her eyes red from sleeplessness. Major Ernest Caldwell, his ruddy face flushed, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Dr. Simon Pritchard clutched his notebook, his spectacles glinting nervously. Julian Trent, the solicitor, maintained his cool demeanor, though his fingers tapped a subtle rhythm on his knee. The staff, Grayson, Mrs. Harrow, Mrs. Gibbs, Ellen, Rose, Tompkins, and Peter, stood in a line, their expressions ranging from stoic to terrified. Poirot stepped forward, his voice clear and commanding. Mesdames et messieurs, we have danced around the truth long enough. Mrs. Eleanor Vance is missing. A glove stained with blood was found here, a handkerchief in the laundry, a gate unlocked, a letter and codicil discovered. These are not accidents, but a carefully crafted illusion. Today, I shall reveal what happened and why. A murmur rippled through the room, but Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. Let us begin with the timeline. At 3:30, Mrs. Vance was seen in the drawing room by Dr. Pritchard and Clara. At 4, Clara saw her leave for the garden, carrying a small bag. By 4:30, her room was found empty, her shawl on the floor, a glove missing, and this blood-stained glove in the library. The window was locked, the gate unlocked, and a man with a scar was seen in the lane. These facts, they point to a disappearance, or so we are meant to believe. Lady Ashford's voice trembled. Sir Poirot, do you mean Eleanor is alive? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Patience, madame. Let us first consider the clues. The glove, it is stained with blood, real blood, as the constable's analysis confirmed, but not human. It is animal blood, likely from the kitchen. The handkerchief, too, bears the same blood, carefully placed in the laundry to be found. These are props, meant to suggest a crime where none exists. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. No crime? But the codicil, the letter, Eleanor was terrified. Oui, mademoiselle, Poirot said, his tone gentle but firm. The codicil is real, and it is the key. Mrs. Vance found it in a book in this library, a codicil to Sir Reginald's will, naming a secret beneficiary. This beneficiary stood to inherit a significant portion of the estate, disrupting the plans of others. Mrs. Vance, she intended to confront this person, and that is why she vanished. Major Caldwell's face reddened. This is nonsense, Poirot. You're accusing someone without proof. Poirot's gaze turned to him, sharp and unrelenting. Proof, Major. The proof is in your... was intercepted here in the library. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them. He continued, pacing slowly. The smudge on the hairbrush, the scratch on the windowsill, these suggest someone entered her room to stage her disappearance, to make it appear she had fled or been taken. The glove was placed here, the handkerchief in the laundry to create the illusion of foul play. But why? To distract from the codicil, to protect the beneficiary, or to frame another? Dr. Pritchard's voice was shaky. But who, Mr. Poirot? Who would do this? Poirot turned to Julian Trent, whose cool facade had begun to crack, a bead of sweat glistening on his temple. Mr. Trent, you were Sir Reginald's solicitor. You knew of the codicil, did you not? A codicil that named a child, a son, born out of wedlock, to whom Sir Reginald left half his fortune. Mrs. Vance discovered this, and she confronted you, threatening to reveal it to Lady Ashford to ruin the estate's disposition. Trent's face paled, his voice rising. That's absurd. I knew nothing of a codicil. My dealings with Mrs. Vance were about minor estate matters. Poirot raised a hand, his voice cutting through the protest. No, Mr. Trent, you lie. The letter, the codicil, they were in your possession, hidden in the library until Mrs. Vance found them. You argued with her in the conservatory as Ellen overheard, and when she planned to meet someone in the garden, you acted. You lured her to the library, staged the scene, and ensured her silence. Trent leapt to his feet, his composure shattered. This is slander. You have no proof. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The proof? It is in the man with the scar. Peter saw him in the lane, a tall, lean man with a scar on his hand. He is your associate, Mr. Trent. hired to remove Mrs. Vance from the Grange, to hide her until the codicil could be destroyed. But you underestimated her. She is alive, hidden in the village, waiting to return when it is safe." A cry broke from Clara, and Lady Ashford clutched her arm. "Alive? Eleanor is alive?" "Oui," Poirot said. "She was persuaded to leave, under threat, but she left a clue, the letter the codicil mentioned to Clara. She knew the truth would come." Trent's face contorted, and he lunged toward the door, but Constable Harris blocked his path. "You're not going anywhere, sir," Harris said, his voice firm. Poirot turned to the group, his voice calm but triumphant. "The codicil is safe, found this morning in Othello, where Trent hid it again. Mrs. Vance will be brought back, and the truth of Sir Reginald's son will be known. The game, it is over."
Sight. The library, once a stage of deception, now stood as a testament to Poirot's genius. The mystery of Blackthorn Grange resolved in a dramatic, logical reveal.
The reflection. The morning after Hercule Poirot's dramatic revelation in the library of Blackthorn Grange was one of quiet restoration, though the echoes of the previous night's confrontation lingered in the air. The grand estate, bathed in the soft light of an August dawn, seemed to exhale, its stone walls and rose gardens no longer burdened by the weight of deception. The guests and staff moved with a subdued air, their faces reflecting relief, shock, and, in some cases, lingering guilt. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing on the terrace overlooking the gardens, felt a sense of awe at Poirot's genius, tempered by the melancholy that often followed the resolution of a mystery. Hercule Poirot, impeccable as ever in his tailored suit, joined Hastings, his small frame radiating a calm satisfaction. His green eyes, so often sharp with scrutiny, were softened by the morning light, and his moustache was perfectly symmetrical, a sign of inner contentment. He carried a cup of tisane, the steam curling delicately in the cool air, and he sipped it with the precision of a man who found order in every gesture. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low and reflective. "The affair of Blackthorn Grange, it is concluded. The truth, it has been brought to light, and Mrs. Eleanor Vance, she will soon return to this house. Yet, there is always a moment, after the storm, to reflect on what has been learned." Hastings turned, his cigarette smouldering between his fingers. "You were brilliant, Poirot. The way you pieced it all together, the glove, the handkerchief, the codicil, that man with the scar. But how did you know Trent was behind it all, and that Mrs. Vance was alive?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. "The little grey cells, Hastings. They observe, they connect, they deduce. Let us walk, and I shall explain, for there is much to understand about the human heart and its deceptions." They strolled through the rose garden, the gravel crunching softly underfoot, the scent of blooms mingling with the morning dew. Poirot began, his voice measured, as if recounting a story he had long foreseen. "From the beginning, mon ami, I suspected the disappearance of Mrs. Vance was no simple crime. The glove stained with animal blood was too theatrical, too deliberate. The handkerchief, hidden in the laundry, was another prop, meant to suggest violence where none had occurred. These were not the acts of a murderer, but of a schemer, one who wished to create fear and confusion." Hastings nodded, flicking ash from his cigarette. "But the codicil? How did you know it was the key?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. Clara's confession was the turning point. She spoke of a letter and a codicil, found by Mrs. Vance mentioning a betrayal and a secret beneficiary.
This, I knew, was the motive. Sir Reginald's will was the heart of the estate, and a codicil that named an unknown heir, a son born out of wedlock, would disrupt everything. Julian Trent, as the solicitor, had the most to lose, for he controlled the estate's legal affairs. If the codicil came to light, his influence, perhaps even his financial gain, would be jeopardized. "But why stage the disappearance?" Hastings asked. "Why not just destroy the codicil?"
Poirot paused by a rosebush, plucking a petal with delicate precision. Because, mon ami, the codicil was not the only threat. Mrs. Vance, she was determined to reveal it. She confronted Trent, as Ellen overheard in the conservatory. He could not destroy the codicil without arousing suspicion, so he devised a plan to make it appear Mrs. Vance had been taken or had fled, thus discrediting her. The man with the scar, his associate, was hired to escort her to the village, under threat to keep her hidden until the codicil could be secured. Hastings frowned, his mind racing. And the smudge on the brush, the scratch on the sill, those were Trent's mistakes. Oui, Poirot said. He entered her room to stage the scene, leaving the shawl, taking the glove. The smudge, it was from his hand, perhaps from the ink he used to forge the anonymous letters to Lady Ashford. The scratch, it was from his shoe, as he leaned to ensure the window was locked, to suggest no escape. These were small errors, but to Hercule Poirot, they were beacons. They reached the small gate at the edge of the garden, the one found unlocked, and Poirot paused, his gaze distant. The man with the scar, seen by Peter, was the final piece. He was no vagrant, but a hired man, sent to watch the house and ensure Mrs. Vance's compliance. Trent underestimated her, however. She left a clue. The mention of the codicil to Clara, knowing it would reach someone she trusted. Hastings shook his head, marveling. It's incredible, Poirot. You saw through it all, the lies, the props, the timing. But what about Mrs. Vance? Will she be all right? Poirot nodded, his expression softening. She is safe, Hastings. Constable Harris has located her in a boarding house in the village under an assumed name. She was frightened, coerced by Trent's threats, but unharmed. She will return today, and the codicil will be presented to Lady Ashford. The truth of Sir Reginald's son will be addressed, with justice and care. They turned back towards the house, the grandeur of Blackthorn Grange rising before them. Hastings felt a pang of sadness for the secrets
Others, and Clara, she will find strength in her honesty. The Grange, it will endure. As they approached the terrace, Lady Ashford emerged, her face pale but composed.
Mr. Poirot, she said, her voice steady. I've just received word from Constable Harris. Eleanor is safe. I cannot thank you enough. Poirot bowed slightly, his demeanour humble.
Madame, it is the work of Hercule Poirot to bring order to chaos. The truth, it is my reward.
Lady Ashford hesitated, then added, the codicil, it changes everything. A son, Reginald's son. I don't know how we'll face it.
You will face it with courage, Poirot said. The truth, it is painful, but it is also a foundation for healing.
As Lady Ashford returned to the house, Poirot and Hastings lingered on the terrace. The detective sipped his tisane, his gaze distant. This case, Hastings, it reminds us of the fragility of trust and the power of the mind to uncover what is hidden. The little grey cells, they do not fail. Hastings smiled, extinguishing his cigarette. You're a marvel, Poirot. I don't know how you do it, but I'm glad you're on our side. Poirot's eyes twinkled.
On the side of truth, mon ami, always.
With that, Poirot turned toward the house, his steps light, his mission complete. The mystery of Blackthorn Grange had been solved, its secrets laid bare. And Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, quietly exited the stage, leaving the estate to heal in the light of truth. Chapter 12. The Return of Mrs. Vance.
The midday sun cast a warm glow over Blackthorn Grange, softening the stark edges of its stone facade and lending a fleeting sense of peace to the estate. The resolution of the mystery, with Julian Trent's exposure and the discovery of the codicil, had lifted the veil of fear that had shrouded the house. Yet an air of anticipation lingered. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the missing piece of the puzzle, was due to return, and her arrival promised to stir emotions and questions that had yet to be fully addressed. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the drawing room with a cup of tea, felt a mix of relief and curiosity. His eyes drifting to the window where the gravel drive awaited the sound of an approaching car. Hercule Poirot, impeccable in his tailored suit, stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his green eyes thoughtful. His moustache, perfectly symmetrical, betrayed no hint of the whirlwind of activity that had culminated in last night's revelation. Yet Hastings knew his friend was still alert, his mind sifting through the nuances of the case, ensuring no detail had been overlooked.
His brow furrowed. You think there's more to come, Poirot? Trent's been caught, the codicil's been found, and Mrs. Vance is safe. Surely the worst is over. Poirot's eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity. The worst, the truth is like a river. It flows, but it is never still. There may be ripples yet, Hastings, secrets that surface in the light of truth. As if on cue, the sound of a car's engine reached their ears, and the drawing room's occupants, Lady Beatrice Ashford, Clara Ashford, Major Ernest Caldwell, and Dr. Simon Pritchard stirred, their faces a mix of relief and apprehension. The staff, too, had gathered discreetly in the hall, their whispers hushed as they awaited Mrs. Vance's arrival. Constable Harris had telephoned earlier to confirm that Mrs. Vance had been found in a modest boarding house in the nearby village of Ashworthy, under the assumed name of Mrs. Ellis. She had been frightened but unharmed, persuaded by Trent's threats to flee and remain hidden until the codicil could be secured. Her return was a moment of triumph for Poirot, but also a test for the household, as the implications of the codicil loomed large. Grayson, the butler, opened the front door, and Mrs. Eleanor Vance stepped into the hall, her slight figure draped in a dark coat, her face pale and drawn. Her grey hair was dishevelled, and her eyes, though weary, held a spark of resilience. Lady Ashford rushed forward, embracing her sister-in-law with a cry of relief. "Eleanor, thank God you're safe." Clara followed, her eyes brimming with tears as she clasped Mrs. Vance's hands. "We were so frightened, Eleanor. I'm so sorry I didn't follow you that day." Mrs. Vance's lips trembled, but she managed the weak smile. "Clara, my dear, you couldn't have known. I was foolish to confront him alone." Poirot stepped forward, bowing slightly. "Madame Vance, I am Hercule Poirot. It is my honor to welcome you back to Blackthorn Grange. Your courage, it has helped uncover a great truth." Mrs. Vance's gaze met his, her expression a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "Mr. Poirot, I owe you my life. But the truth, it comes at a cost." The group moved to the drawing room, where tea was served, the ritual of hospitality a balm for frayed nerves. Mrs. Vance sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a cup, her voice low as she recounted her ordeal. "I found the letter and codicil in the library, hidden in a volume of Othello. It was from Reginald, written months before his death. It spoke of a betrayal by someone close, and it named a son, born years ago to a woman he loved before he met Beatrice. The codicil left half the estate to this son, a man named Edward Grayson, no relation to our butler, I presume." A murmur of surprise passed through the room. Lady Ashford's face paled, her hands tightening on her.
"He kept it secret, even from me, until I found the letter. I confronted Julian Trent, thinking he could explain. Instead, he grew angry, threatening. He said if I spoke of it, the family would suffer. He arranged for a man, a tall, lean fellow with a scar on his hand, to take me to the village to keep me hidden. I was terrified, so I went, leaving the glove and shawl to make it seem I'd been taken. Poirot listened, his expression unreadable. And the blood on the glove and handkerchief, madame? How did it come to be?
Mrs. Vance's cheeks flushed.
That was my doing, Mr. Poirot. I pricked my finger before I left, thinking a trace of blood might raise alarm, ensure someone would search for me. I didn't expect it to be animal blood. Trent must have added that later to heighten the deception.
Hastings, sitting nearby, marveled at the complexity of the scheme.
So, Trent used your own clue against you, making it look like a crime.
Oui, Poirot said, his voice soft but firm.
He was clever, but not clever enough. The smudge on your hairbrush, the scratch on the sill, these were his errors, small but significant. And your mention of the codicil to Clara, it was the spark that lit the truth.
Lady Ashford set down her cup, her voice trembling.
This son, Edward Grayson, where is he? What does this mean for the estate?
Mrs. Vance's eyes softened.
I don't know where he is, Beatrice. The codicil gave an address in London, but it's old. I wanted to find him, to honor Reginald's wishes, but Trent, he wanted it buried.
Poirot nodded, his hands clasped.
The codicil. It is now in the hands of Constable Harris, and it will be verified. The truth of Edward Grayson will be pursued with care and justice. But for now, Madame Vance, you are safe, and the deception is ended.
The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling over them. Major Caldwell, his face still flushed, cleared his throat. Well, it's a damnable mess. But I'm glad you're back, Eleanor. We'll sort this out. Dr. Pritchard, his notebook open, scribbled quietly, his scholarly curiosity undimmed.
A hidden heir, he murmured. It's like something from a novel.
Clara reached for Mrs. Vance's hand, her voice soft.
I'm just glad you're here, Eleanor. We'll face this together.
As the conversation turned to plans for the estate, Poirot and Hastings stepped onto the terrace, the air cool and fragrant with roses. Hastings lit a cigarette, his mind still reeling.
Beauty a testament to resilience. Poirot's little grey cells had triumphed, but the story of Blackthorn Grange he knew would continue to unfold, its secrets now part of its legacy.
Chapter 13. The Shadow of Secrets. The afternoon sun hung high over Blackthorn Grange, its rays piercing the lingering clouds and bathing the estate in a warm, golden light that seemed to promise renewal. Yet beneath the surface of this apparent calm, the ripples of the recent revelations continued to stir the household. Mrs. Eleanor Vance's return had brought relief, but the discovery of the codicil and the existence of Sir Reginald's secret son, Edward Grayson, cast a long shadow over the family's future. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the library with a newspaper he barely read, felt the weight of unanswered questions, his mind turning over the complexities of the case. Hercule Poirot, standing by a bookshelf, his small frame as precise as ever, was examining a volume of Shakespeare with a thoughtful air, his green eyes reflecting a mind still at work. "Mon ami," Poirot said, closing the book with a soft thud, "the mystery of Blackthorn Grange, it is resolved. Yet there are shadows that linger. The codicil, it has revealed a truth, but truths, they often lead to new questions. The identity of Edward Grayson, the man with the scar, these are threads we must still follow." Hastings folded the newspaper, his brow furrowed. "You think there's more to this, Poirot? I thought Trent was the mastermind, and with Mrs. Vance back, the case was closed." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of quiet amusement. "Closed, Hastings? No. The case is solved, but the story it continues. The man with the scar seen by Peter, he is not merely a hired thug. He is a link to Edward Grayson, perhaps, or to another secret Trent wished to keep buried. We must be vigilant." The household had gathered in the drawing room for luncheon, a subdued affair marked by tentative attempts at normalcy. Lady Beatrice Ashford, her composure restored but fragile, presided over the table with a determined grace. Mrs. Vance, seated beside her, looked stronger than the previous day, though her eyes still held a haunted quality. Clara Ashford, her pearl necklace now still, offered her aunt a reassuring smile. Major Ernest Caldwell, his ruddy face less flushed, made an effort at joviality, though his jokes fell flat. Dr. Simon Pritchard, his notebook absent for once, seemed lost in thought, his spectacles glinting as he stared at his plate. The staff, too, had resumed their duties with a quiet efficiency, though Hastings noted a lingering unease in their movements. Grayson, the butler, served with his usual precision, but his eyes darted toward Mrs. Vance, as if seeking reassurance of her safety. Ellen and Rose, the maids, moved silently.
"Ashford's right," observed the scene with his characteristic intensity, his gaze lingering on each face. "Madame Vance," he said, his voice gentle but probing, "you spoke of an address in London, mentioned in the codicil for Edward Grayson. Can you recall it? It may lead us to the next step." Mrs. Vance set down her fork, her expression thoughtful. "It was an old address, Mr. Poirot, in Bloomsbury, 12 Russell Square, I believe. But it was written years ago, before Reginald's death. I don't know if it's still valid." Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled. "Bon. This is most useful. Constable Harris will pursue this lead, and we shall see what it reveals about Sir Reginald's son." Lady Ashford's voice was soft but firm. "Mr. Poirot, if this Edward Grayson is found, what then? The estate. It's been in the family for generations. A stranger, even Reginald's son, will change everything." Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone remained resolute. "Madame, the truth. It is a foundation, not a destruction. If Edward Grayson is found, his claim will be verified with care. Justice, it must be served. But so too must compassion." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Constable Harris entered, his young face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Poirot, I've news from the village. We've traced the man with the scar, seen again near Ashworthy this morning. He's staying at the Red Lion Inn under the name of John Carver. I've men watching him, but we need your guidance." Poirot's eyes gleamed, and he rose with a swiftness that belied his small stature. "Excellent, Constable. This John Carver, he is the shadow we seek. Hastings, come, we shall visit the Red Lion and confront this man." The drive to Ashworthy was brief. The village a quaint cluster of stone cottages and a single inn, its sign creaking in the breeze. The Red Lion was a modest establishment, its taproom quiet in the early afternoon. Poirot and Hastings, accompanied by Harris, were led to a private parlour where John Carver awaited. He was a tall, lean man, his dark coat and hat matching Peter's description. A faint scar ran across the back of his left hand, visible as he adjusted his gloves. "Mr. Carver," Poirot said, his voice calm but commanding. "I am Hercule Poirot. You have been seen watching Blackthorn Grange, and you were involved in the removal of Mrs. Eleanor Vance. Speak now and tell me who you are and who employed you." Carver's eyes narrowed, but he leaned back, his demeanor cool. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Poirot. I'm a traveler passing through.
composure faltered, his hand twitching. Edward Grayson? You're mad. I'm John Carver, a private inquiry agent. Trent paid me to persuade Mrs. Vance to leave, yes. He said she was causing trouble, threatening the estate. I took her to the boarding house, nothing more. Poirot's moustache twitched. And the codicil? Did Trent tell you of its contents? Carver hesitated, then shook his head. He said it was a legal matter, something that could ruin the family. I didn't ask questions. My job was to keep her quiet, not to pry. Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. Bon. You will remain here, under the constable's watch, until your story is verified. But I warn you, Monsieur Carver, the truth, it is a light you cannot escape. As they left the inn, Hastings turned to Poirot, his mind racing. Do you believe him, Poirot? Is he just a hired man, or could he be Edward Grayson? Poirot's eyes narrowed. He is not Grayson, mon ami. His manner, his scar, they are too convenient, too calculated. But he knows more than he says. We must find the real Edward Grayson, and the address in Bloomsbury will guide us. Back at Blackthorn Grange, the news of Carver's interrogations spread quickly, adding a new layer of tension. Lady Ashford, informed of the development, resolved to send a solicitor to London to investigate the Bloomsbury address. Mrs. Vance, her strength returning, vowed to assist, her determination to honour her brother's wishes unwavering. As the day drew to a close, Poirot and Hastings stood once more in the rose garden, the air cool and fragrant. The shadows, Hastings, Poirot said. They are lifting, but they leave traces. The truth of Edward Grayson. It will reshape this family, and we must ensure it is handled with care. Hastings nodded, extinguishing his cigarette. You've done it again, Poirot. But I can't help wondering, what's next for the Grange? Poirot smiled, his gaze distant. The future, mon ami. It is for them to write. For Hercule Poirot, it is enough to have brought light to the shadows. The evening settled over Blackthorn Grange, its secrets no longer hidden, but its story far from finished. Chapter 14. The Search for Edward Grayson. The late afternoon at Blackthorn Grange was bathed in a soft, amber light, the sun dipping toward the horizon and casting long shadows across the rolling lawns. The return of Mrs. Ellen
Ever, his small frame radiating a quiet determination, his green eyes gleaming with the anticipation of tying up the final threads of the mystery. Mon ami, Poirot said, turning to Hastings, the affair of Blackthorn Grange, it is nearly complete, but the shadow of Edward Grayson remains. The address in Bloomsbury, the man with the scar, these are the final pieces of our puzzle. We must pursue them, for the truth, it is not fully revealed until all its parts are known. Hastings set down his glass, his brow furrowed. You're determined to find this Edward Grayson, aren't you, Poirot? But what if the address is a dead end? It's years old, and Carver claims he's just a hired man, not Grayson himself. Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of quiet confidence. The address, it may be old, but it is a starting point. And John Carver, he is a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole. His scar, his presence in the lane, they are too deliberate to be mere coincidence. We shall go to London, Hastings, and uncover the truth of Edward Grayson. The decision was made to travel to London the following morning, with Lady Beatrice Ashford's blessing. She had engaged a trusted solicitor, Mr. Harold Wentworth, to accompany Poirot and Hastings and investigate the Bloomsbury address. Mrs. Vance, her strength returning, insisted on joining them, determined to see her brother's wishes fulfilled. Clara, though reluctant to leave her aunt, offered to assist with any correspondence, her youthful energy a counterpoint to the gravity of the task. The journey to London was swift, the train rattling through the countryside as the trio, Poirot, Hastings and Mrs. Vance, sat in a private compartment. Mr. Wentworth, a bespectacled man with a meticulous air, reviewed the codicil, its faded ink a testament to its age. "This is a remarkable document," he said, adjusting his glasses. "If Edward Grayson can be found, his claim to half the estate is legally binding. But we must verify his identity and ensure no further deceptions." Mrs. Vance, her hands clasped tightly, nodded. "Reginald would have wanted him found. I only wish he had told me sooner." Poirot's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "Madame, your brother's silence, it was to protect his family, but the truth, it cannot be hidden forever. We shall find Edward Grayson, or we shall learn why he remains in the shadows." The address at 12 Russell Square proved to be a modest townhouse, its brick facade weathered but respectable. The landlady, a stout woman named Mrs. Potter, greeted them with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Grayson, you say?" she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "No one by that name's lived here in years. The last tenant was a Mr. Edward Blake about 10 years back. Quiet man, kept to himself. Moved out suddenly, left no forwarding address." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Edward—"
Mrs. Potter frowned, a memory strained. "Tall, lean, dark hair, had a scar on his hand, I recall. You said it was from a childhood accident. Polite enough, but secretive. Paid his rent in cash, never had visitors." Hastings felt a jolt of excitement. "A scar on his hand? Poirot, that sounds like Carver." Poirot's expression was unreadable, but his voice was sharp. "Indeed, Hastings, most interesting. Madam Potter, do you have any records of Mr. Blake's time here? Letters, perhaps, or a lease?" Mrs. Potter shook her head. "I keep a tidy house, sir, but I don't hold on to old papers. He was here a year, maybe less. Said he was a writer, but I never saw him publish anything." The trail seemed to end there, but Poirot was undeterred. He requested a visit to the local post office, where old records might linger. The clerk, a grizzled man with a penchant for gossip, recalled forwarding mail for an Edward Blake to a postbox in Chelsea, though the arrangement had lapsed years ago. Armed with this lead, Poirot directed Wentworth to contact colleagues in Chelsea, while he and Hastings returned to the Red Lion Inn in Ashworthy to confront John Carver once more. Carver, still under Constable Harris's watch, was less composed than before, his cool demeanour fraying under Poirot's relentless scrutiny. "Mr. Carver," Poirot said, his voice like a blade, "you have lied to us. You are not merely a hired man. You are Edward Blake, are you not? The man who lived at 12 Russell Square, the man with the scar, the man named in Sir Reginald's codicil as Edward Grayson." Carver's face paled, his hand twitching toward the scar. "You're mad, Poirot. I told you I'm John Carver, a private agent. Trent hired me, nothing more." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes unrelenting. "Non, monsieur. The landlady at Russell Square, she described you perfectly. Tall, lean, a scar on the hand. You were Sir Reginald's son, hidden from the world, but known to Julian Trent. He sought to keep you silent, to prevent the codicil's revelation. Why did you agree to his scheme? Was it money or fear?" Carver's composure cracked, his voice rising. "I'm not Grayson. I was paid to watch the house, to take Mrs. Vance away, that's all." But Poirot's gaze held him fast. "You protest too much, monsieur. The codicil, it names you. The address, it leads to you. And the scar, it marks you. Speak the truth, or the law will speak for you."
Carver slumped, his shoulders sagging. "All right," he whispered. "I'm Edward Blake, and yes, Edward Grayson. I didn't know about the codicil until Trent contacted me a year ago. He said the family would never accept me, that I'd ruin them. He offered money to stay away, to keep quiet. When Mrs. Vance found the codicil, he panicked, told me to scare her off. I didn't hurt her, I just took her to the mouth."
"You're Reginald's son. Why didn't you come forward?"
Carver, Grayson, looked away, his voice low.
"I didn't want the estate or the fight. I just wanted peace. Trent said he'd handle it, but he lied."
Poirot nodded, his expression grave.
"The truth, it is painful, but it is free. You will return to Blackthorn Grange, Monsieur Grayson, and face the family. The codicil, it will be honoured."
Back at the Grange, the revelation of Edward Grayson's identity sent shockwaves through the household. Lady Ashford, her face pale, agreed to meet him, her resolve tempered by a sense of duty. Clara, ever compassionate, offered to help bridge the gap, while Mrs. Vance vowed to support her brother's son. Major Caldwell muttered about family scandals, but Dr. Pritchard, his curiosity piqued, began researching the legal implications. As evening fell, Poirot and Hastings stood once more in the rose garden, the air cool and fragrant. "You've done it, Poirot," Hastings said, lighting a cigarette. "You've found the sun, exposed the truth. The Grange will never be the same." Poirot's eyes twinkled.
"The truth, mon ami, it changes everything, but it also heals. Edward Grayson will find his place, and Blackthorn Grange will endure." The mystery was nearly complete, but one final chapter awaited, as the family prepared to face its new reality. Chapter 15. The Legacy of Truth. The final day at Blackthorn Grange dawned with a serene clarity, the early morning mist curling gently around the estate's ivy-clad towers, as if the house itself were exhaling the last of its secrets. The revelation of Edward Grayson's identity as Sir Reginald's hidden son had shifted the very foundation of the Ashford family, and the air was thick with the promise of change. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing on the terrace with a cup of coffee, felt a quiet satisfaction mingled with a touch of melancholy, the weight of the mystery's resolution tempered by the complexities it had left in its wake. Hercule Poirot, impeccable in his tailored suit, joined him, his green eyes reflecting the soft light of the rising sun, his moustache perfectly symmetrical, a sign of a mind at peace with its triumph. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice calm and reflective, "the affair of Blackthorn Grange, it is complete. The truth has been uncovered, the shadows dispelled. Yet, the legacy of such a truth, it will shape this house for years to come. The little grey cells, they have done their work. But the heart, it must now take over." Hastings sipped his coffee, his brow furrowed. "You've worked a miracle, Poirot." "It will grow, with care and courage. Come, let us join the others, for the final act of this drama awaits."
The drawing room was filled with a quiet energy as the household gathered for a final meeting. Lady Beatrice Ashford stood by the fireplace, her silver hair gleaming, a posture regal, but softened by newfound humility. Mrs. Eleanor Vance sat beside her, a face weary but resolute, her hands steady as she clasped a small photograph of her late brother, Sir Reginald. Clara Ashford, a youthful vitality tempered by the ordeal, offered a warm smile to Edward Grayson, who stood awkwardly near the door, his lean frame and scarred hand marking him as the man once known as John Carver. Major Ernest Caldwell, his ruddy face subdued,
sat with a glass of brandy, while Dr. Simon Pritchard, his scholarly curiosity undimmed, scribbled notes, his spectacles glinting. The staff, Grayson the butler, Mrs. Harrow, Mrs. Gibbs, Ellen, Rose, Tompkins, and Peter, stood discreetly along the walls, their faces reflecting a mix of relief and uncertainty. Constable Harris was present, his notebook open, ready to record the proceedings for legal clarity. Mr. Harold Wentworth, the solicitor, had returned from London with documents verifying the codicil's authenticity, his meticulous demeanour a reassuring presence. Lady Ashford spoke first, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, we owe you a debt beyond words. You have brought Eleanor back to us and uncovered a truth that, though painful, honours my husband's wishes. Edward," she turned to Grayson, her eyes searching his face, "you are Reginald's son. This house, this family, must now make a place for you." Edward Grayson shifted uncomfortably, his voice low. "Lady Ashford, I never meant to disrupt your life. I didn't know about the codicil until Trent contacted me. And even then, I wanted no part of a fight. I only agreed to his scheme to keep the peace." Mrs. Vance reached out, her hand trembling slightly. "Edward, your family. Reginald would have wanted you here, not hidden away. I'm sorry I didn't know sooner." Clara stepped forward, her eyes bright with compassion. "We'll help you, Edward. You don't have to face this alone." Major Caldwell cleared his throat, his tone gruff but sincere. "Well, it's a shock, no doubt. But if you're Reggie's boy, you've a right to be here. Let's do this properly." Dr. Pritchard looked up from his notebook, his voice thoughtful. "The historical significance of this moment, it's remarkable. A hidden heir, heart of Blackthorn Grange. It beats with resilience, and it will endure." Mr. Wentworth nodded, adjusting his glasses. "The legal process will take time, but the codicil is binding. I've begun inquiries to ensure Edward's claim is properly documented. The estate will be divided, but with careful management all parties can be provided for." Lady Ashford's lips tightened, but she nodded. "We will work together, for Reginald's sake. Edward, you are welcome here as family." Edward's face softened, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Thank you, Lady Ashford. I don't want to take anything from you. I want to know the man my father was." The room fell silent, the weight of the moment settling over them. Poirot's gaze moved from face to face, noting the resolve, the uncertainty, the tentative bonds forming. "The tooth," he said softly. "It is a bridge, not a barrier. You have crossed it together, and now you must walk forward." As the meeting dispersed, the guests and staff moved to their tasks, the house buzzing with a new sense of purpose. Lady Ashford and Mrs. Vance began planning a meeting with Edward to discuss his role in the family. Clara offered to show him the gardens, her warmth, a beacon of acceptance. The staff, relieved of the mystery's burden, resumed their duties with a lighter step. Poirot and Hastings retired to the terrace, the air cool and fragrant with roses. Hastings lit a cigarette, his mind still marvelling at the case's resolution. "You've done it, Poirot. You've not only solved the mystery but given this family a chance to heal. It's more than I expected." Poirot sipped his tisane, his eyes distant. "The mystery, mon ami, it is not merely about crime, but about people. Their fears, their hopes, their secrets. Hercule Poirot, he uncovers the truth, but it is for others to live it. Blackthorn Grange, it will find its way." Hastings smiled, extinguishing his cigarette. "You're a philosopher as much as a detective, old chap. What's next for you?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a spark of mischief in his eyes. "Next, a quiet moment perhaps, to enjoy the order of a well-solved case. And then, mon ami, the world will call, and the little grey cells, they will answer." As the sun climbed higher, casting its light over the estate, Poirot and Hastings prepared to depart, their work at Blackthorn Grange complete. The house, its secrets laid bare, stood ready to embrace its new future, a testament to the power of truth and the enduring genius of Hercule Poirot.